Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for sticking around to the end. We seem to be good at getting graveyard shifts at conferences, but fortunately we had the sexy lead-in today of blockchain, so great to see so many of you still in the audience. I'm just going to give just a brief recap for those of you who are new to RA21 about what it is, what we're doing, what we're trying to achieve, and then the bulk of this is going to be an update from Ralph and Meltem about two work streams that we've been running over the past few months. So, as a reminder, RA21 Resource Access for the 21st Century, it's a joint initiative between STM and NISO, National Information Standards Organization, and what we're trying to do is fix the access problem in scholarly comms, right? Some of the pain points we heard yesterday in the talk in the afternoon about some of the difficulty that legitimate users have gaining access to stuff they legitimately should have access to, and why we've made it so frustrating for them they go and get it from places which are not legitimate. And why is this important? Well, I mean, we all know in our industry since we first went online in the mid-90s that IP access has been the predominant access mechanism, and that works just fine, right? That works just fine if you're sitting in a university building connected to a computer that's plugged into the wall, right? So 20 years ago, that was fantastic, right? But increasingly, that's not the case. We all know that folks are on the move, they're on mobile devices, they want access anytime, anywhere, and the hoops that we make folks jump through when they're not plugged into the computer that's plugged into the wall in the university building mean that, you know, they get incredibly frustrated and they resort to other means of getting the stuff they want. And you can see great stats there from ACS, from Ralph, you know, the past few years, just the huge growth in this case, mobile access to content. So what are we doing? And again, this is a recap. We've got a bunch of interested parties together, software vendors, libraries, federation operators, publishers, identity federations, I should say, service providers, because we realized very early on that this is a problem that needs to be solved across all of the parties who play a role in this scholarly communications value chain. Right? If this was just an initiative from publishers, we wouldn't get very far because we need libraries to understand it and adopt it. We need the identity federations who provide a lot of the foundation to improve some of the things they do. We need the vendors to support it. So that's why very early on we brought NISO into the fold and set this up as a joint initiative. And we've also had great engagement from the academic scholarly identity federation operators who've been doing wonderful work for many years, but largely haven't really got a huge adoption in our industry yet, or huge use from end users. So we're doing three things. We are trying to test and pilot solutions for solving the problem. That's what we're in the process of now. When we've done that, we're going to publish recommendations via the NISO best practices process. A new thing we've realized in the past few months we also need to do is that both of the technical options that we're exploring at the moment require some fairly thin but nonetheless centrally hosted technical infrastructure. So we've realized that once we move out of project mode, there's going to have to be somebody, a neutral trusted third party, to run that infrastructure. So we've started informal discussions with a number of the usual suspects, you know, trusted, neutral, non-profit organizations who might be interested in running this infrastructure. So what we're mostly, I think those of you who will have heard our presentations before will have heard about the three pilots we're running. The corporate pilot that is looking at specific access challenges for corporate customers, two technical pilots, P3W and WaveCloud, looking at particular technical approaches. Those are still ongoing, but what we realized 3 or 4 months ago is actually there are two really important things we need to think about that cut across all of those things, right? One is establishing the user experience, because an improved user experience and a consistent user experience is going to be critical to success here. And the second is making sure we're thinking through these solutions about all the privacy and security aspects, because whenever you're talking about identity and access management, obviously those are very important topics. So we've kind of formed these two work streams out of the groups who are involved in the pilots. And what I'll do now is hand over to Ralph, who's going to talk about the great stuff the UX work stream's been doing. Ralph.
So as Evka mentioned, we have a lot of people working with us on RA21. I think when Julia and I did a recap recently, we found over 60 different organizations working with us in some capacity, which is pretty amazing. On the user experience thread, we have, it's a very collaborative thread as well. I've put the organizations here that are the most actively involved in the user experience thread. Give a call out here to ProQuest. They have put up some of their internal user experience team to facilitate this thread, and things like this don't happen without great volunteer leadership, and we have that here. So the current situation that we all really understand today is that, as Chris said, off-campus access is cumbersome. We have a number of different solutions that we've all tried as publishers to put in place, but we have created quite the quagmire, quite frankly, for our own users for off-campus access. And so, you know, we've tried proxy servers and VPN servers, and this shows the instruction page from Ohio State for how to set this up. It is not easy. It talks about installing a bookmarklet. It actually talks about how you could go in and hack the URL in the browser location. And it says if you're trying to do it over VPN, don't even try, it won't work. We've tried device pairing, you know, where if you are on campus, you can cache your IP credentials, if you will, on your device so that for some period of time you can go off campus and have access. More recently, I won't get into the details here, but Highwire has announced their partnership with Google on something called CASA, which effectively does the same thing. It kind of caches your IP entitlements with your Google account. But the thing to recognize here is that all of these solutions ultimately rely upon IP address authentication at the core. The other really important thing, more from a user experience perspective, is they all require the user to do something in advance. Some kind of pre-setup is required. And so we are really cognizant on the RA21 UX team that, you know, the RA21 initiative itself is a user experience initiative. And so this is a great quote from Steve Jobs, that you have to start there and then get to the technology. So in that spirit, I'm happy to announce that we're going to build the user experience for RA21 on blockchain. That's a joke. So what we really are trying to do is we're mimicking a pattern that all of you have experienced on the consumer web, where websites are asking you to pick a username and password that you already have access to in order to log in to our site. And so, like, this is what happens with Doodle. If you don't have a Doodle account yet, you can go there, you can sign up with Google or with Facebook, or you can create a local account with them. So I chose to link my Google account with them, and then the next time I go there, I'm just magically signed in. No mess, no fuss, I'm just signed in. That's great. There are some concerns here, though, when you do that. Doodle now knows a fair amount about me, knows my name, pulled my picture from my Google account, knows my email address, and so in our world that raises some privacy concerns. This is another pattern that Chris has noted as well, more a B2B pattern, where you're able to sign up for services using your corporate credentials. And services like Outlook and like Atlassian they're basically asking you for your email address, identifying who you are, and then logging in with your work credentials, you can get access as well. So our UX team is really trying to build some of those best practices into what we're doing, but still preserve user privacy. So let me take you through how we're doing that. For us, a typical research discovery workflow starts with a tool of the researcher's choice, and I've listed some common tools there where they might start a research discovery workflow. Ultimately, they're all going to end up with a list of publications, of candidate publications that the researcher chooses to view, and they are going to be across a number of different publishers. Nobody has the monopoly here. So in my case here, Elsevier, the first article is from Elsevier, the second article is from ProQuest, and the third is an ACS article. And when you're on campus, you simply click and you get access. It's very seamless. But we are finding, by and large, when you're off campus, this is what happens. because of the quagmire we have created for our own users, when you're off campus, it's just easier to go here than it is to try to figure out how to get to the publisher site and get the legitimate version of the article. And so what we are trying to do is this. We are simply trying to say, let's route the user back through his or her home institution so that they can continue on to the publisher site, which is where we want them to go. And this works both in the case of like an academic institution like I show here, as well as corporate institutions. The great news here is that the technology that we're leveraging is widely installed. Pretty much every academic institution, pretty much every one of our corporate subscribers, they all have this SAML-based identity management software in place. What we have to do is just create a good user experience on top of it in order to make this all work. So you might be asking, why is this privacy preserving? Because after all, if I'm asking someone to log in, how is that really privacy preserving? Well, it is because what the publisher sees from the institution is not the actual identity of the individual, but it's attributes about that person that gets passed to the publisher. So like what I'm showing here is that there could be some opaque number that gets passed to the publisher for each person at the institution. And you might get other attributes like what the person's role is. Like I say here, the role might be a student. This taxonomy is pretty rich in terms of these attributes. And I show a portion of it here, like, we could be able to differentiate between a library walk-in user versus a faculty user versus a staff or a student. So imagine if you had better knowledge of users of your own, websites, the ability to offer more differentiated user experiences based upon these attributes. This is a future that we're trying to bring to all of us so that we have the ability to do that. But that's also why it is privacy preserving. Another thing that we're working on is the ability for our subscribers to tell us how to give usage reports back to them. An attribute could be, for this particular user, count their usage in this category, like I have here, chem student. Maybe this is a chemistry student. And maybe the subscriber wants to be able to count usage that way. Things like that, there's no way we can do today, right? When you get an opaque IP address coming at you, you have no idea, any of the attributes of the user. So this is another thing that we're working on. So back to specifically our user experience challenge. So today, awesome user experience on campus, awful user experience off campus. RA21 is seeking to make a consistent user experience anywhere on any device. However, that means that on campus will be slightly less seamless than it is today. And every time we say this, whether it's an academic librarian or a corporate librarian or pretty much anybody that, that we talk to, the question always is, how many clicks? What are you really talking about here? And the answer to that is it depends. We have two different, what I'm calling UX patterns that are under development. One is the least technically complex is basically a publisher's site can just kind of point to our discovery service that we're standing up with RA21 and let the user flow through it. I'm going to show you what I mean by that in just a minute because we actually have working code in place, and I'm going to attempt to do a demo in a second. The other more technically complex situation is that through an API, you can actually bring the knowledge of where the user is logging in from, you can bring that up into the publisher website. And I'll show you a little bit more what I mean by both of these. So here's the how many clicks story today. When you start at like Elsevier's site here, you land on Elsevier's site, you don't have access, you're going to see some kind of a consistent banner, a consistent link that says access through your institution. You then have to go and find your institution based upon your email address or based upon your institution's name. You're then directed to your institutional login page, and then you get access to the Elsevier article. Now that might not look a lot different from what we have in place today, but here's the benefit. Once you do that once, the knowledge that, like in this case, I've got GlaxoSmithKline, a corporate subscriber, as the institutional identity provider. Once you do that once, you are kind of in the RA21 ecosystem from that point. Your browser now knows that you've logged in through GlaxoSmithKline. So the next time I go to a different publisher site, in this case I'm on ProQuest site, I see that same icon, but when I click, up comes a page that says, we think you're from Glaxo, right? You simply click and you get access. And then you go to the ACS site, same user experience. We think you're from Glaxo, right? You click and you get access. And then furthermore, once you've visited a publisher site at least once, any subsequent visits back to that publisher site, now it looks just like IP. You simply, you have a session on that site and you simply get access. And RA21 may make some recommendations for how long that access should live, but that's really a publisher decision. It could be hours, days, weeks, months, you know, that your session might live on that site. And so once you do that, you're in, you get access. The level 2 looks a little bit more like this, where in that middle layer, we're actually bringing that knowledge of your identity provider up into the publisher UI. So it eliminates a click as well from there. And I've got a blow up here so I can kind of show what I mean. On the level 1, you have to click here on that link. You then go to the next site where you have to choose that you want to log in through Glaxo. And the level 2, it might look more like this, where that is actually up in the publisher website itself. And that requires an API to go out and like grab that information and bring it back into the publisher UI. Okay, makes sense? You want to see it? So I tried this in London, and if you were there, it didn't work. So I'm going to give it a shot again. Okay, this is a mocked up Google Scholar page. Yeah, you can see it good. Of the same 3 articles. The first is from Elsevier, the second is from ProQuest, and the third is from ACS. So I click on the Elsevier article, and I come and I do not have access to the article. So I click on access through your institution, and I come here and note that it's telling me where I'm trying to get to. I'm trying to get to Science Direct. Here I have the ability to just start typing, and it will, there we go, it worked. It will show me all the institutions that start matching what I've typed. I want to point out here as well that, like, even though I type well, no, I want to point out that if I do things like Joe at UCLA, it will look on the email address domain and find it, even though the name of the institution doesn't have UCLA in it at all. So we're trying to do some things like that, to make it easier. So now I will actually try a login. We have a test institution that our friends at Open Athens created for us, so I can actually do a login because I don't have a login at any academic institutions. So there it worked. Note that I'm back on Elsevier's site, and I have been logged in, and access is provided by the test institution that I have set up. So now if I go back to Google Scholar, now I'm in, right? I'm in that ecosystem. Now I go to ProQuest environment. I click on access through your institution. It says, would you like to log in through the thing you just logged into? I say sure, and I get access to the ProQuest article. And that same, yeah, right. So there you go. It's actually working. It's a prototype, but it's actually working. So that's what I wanted to show you. I'll turn it back over to Meltem now.
I have the privilege of closing this with the exciting topic of security and privacy after all the exciting user experience demo here. So I'll try to be brief. So why do we have a security and privacy team? Let me start with that. As Chris mentioned in the beginning, and as those of you who've been following us know, that we have been running 2 pilot implementations. The very problem that the pilot implementations are trying to solve for is, how do we know you're from Ohio State? With the IP address, it's easy because we know the range of the Ohio State, and you come to us publishers, and we know who you are, and we grant you access. When you take away the IP address, we need to have something. We don't have a crystal ball. We need to know where you're from. We don't need anything else, just that little piece of information. Our two pilots are trying to get at it from two different ways to see how we can determine that with the least intrusive, most secure, most private methodology. Our pilots are coming to an end, so both of them have sort of finished. They have working code, and we decided and we wanted to put them through a pretty strict and thorough security and privacy test, because we know that industry is very much interested in what we're doing, and they want to make sure that we're not compromising privacy or security. So you see a lot of impressive titles here on this page. So we actually went out to our collaborating organizations, and we specifically asked for the experts to come and form a group and help us assess our pilots. So we have CISOs, we have people in charge of licensing compliance, and also we have library representatives coming together and have been sort of meeting once a week and looking at the, assessing the pilots using various criteria. We have a document right now in a draft form, so when it's completed, we'll just share the, I think it's about a 37-page document right now with everybody. Right now, what we've done is we've assessed security and privacy on some known methodology. And then we made recommendations, the group made recommendations to each pilot how they would address those, the findings. What we use for the security analysis is the STRIDE threat model that sort of goes and evaluates them for spoofing, tampering with data, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, elevation of privilege, and it has all multiple criteria. And for privacy, they did a data protection impact analysis, and they decided they would need to do that because GDPR gives them a checklist to see if we do need to do a data privacy analysis. And that checklist had, I think, 3 things that applied to us. One was, are we employing new technologies? Yes, we are. The other one was, are we matching and combining data sets? Yes, we are, even if it's a tiny little portion of data. And the third one was, are we tracking individuals' behaviors and locations? Since we are sort of tracking where the people are from, so we said, yes, we do need to do a privacy analysis. Good news is, again, we'll share the detail later. They do the output of the security threat analysis is levels of priority. Priority 1 meaning the highest risk and very likely to happen and easy to impose a threat. And priority 4 is the not likely to happen, and it's very difficult to actually create an environment that would impose a threat. Almost all of our criteria passed with a priority 4 level. There are no significant risks that either pilot which would prevent them moving forward. There's some residual risks. With the Wave Cloud, the attack surface area is considered high because it has a centralized service that has a hashtag of a device and linkage of that hashtag to your institution. So there is a possibility that someone might actually attack that database. However, because it has no sort of, the user experience has little dependency on that, it doesn't actually pose a big risk. And also, the committee decided the nature of the data involved is very low value. It's not attributable to any natural person. It's the hashtag to a device. So, and then they actually recommended a number of actions that we should, if we choose any of the pilots should actually implement. And we're about to actually do an architecture analysis on both pilots, apply these recommendations, and now make our final decisions on what technology implementation methodology we're going to recommend going forward. And that's about it from security privacy perspective. I think back to Chris.
Great, thanks, Meltem. So just a very brief wrap up, and then maybe we have time for a few questions. So, we have some specific challenges in scholarly information, which is why we've established this initiative rather than just adopting something that's already out there on the consumer web or some of the other solutions that you saw that's starting to happen in the B2B space, we have this proliferation of identity providers, right? I think there are 6,000 IDPs that we deal with in Elsevier in our various federations that we participate in. So it's a little bit more complicated than just Google and Facebook. You know, there's not just two buttons to say who do you want to sign in with. That's why we need this wave thing. We also, as we've demoed in the prototype, that we need a solution that works at point of access, right? So that typical use case, you're on a discovery platform, you're on Google, you land at the article, you can't get access, you're stuck, right? And we really need a solution that works to enable the user to get access without having done something, you know, ahead of time to set things up, configure their proxy, set up their Google CAS or whatever, right? It's very clear and also, you know, apparent from the feedback we've received from the community that privacy protection and support for anonymous access is absolutely vital in our community, right? So, you know, the approach that Ralph talked about with those attributes rather than user identity are really important in this space. And we need to provide this kind of consistent UX that will work across all of the resource providers. There are lots of things we're not doing. Every time we talk about this, we have discussions about that. So I co-authored an article with Heather Flanagan, who's our pilot coordinator in the audience, and with Todd Carpenter from NISO on Scholarly Kitchen a month or so ago. Won't go into the details of that, but if you're interested, have a read. And there's a lively, should I say, conversation in the comments thread that many of the folks in this room participated in. Takeaways, why do we need to do something other than build on top of IP? Well, as Ralph said, we really need a solution that has no prior setup. The ability for publishers to operate these differentiated user experiences without necessarily knowing the specific identity of the user based on these attributes, which I think is a fairly unique requirement in our space. From the security point of view, which is where all this started, moving away from IP means that if we discover compromised credentials, and that does happen, we can work with the institution in a secure, again, privacy-preserving way to say, hey, this user with this attribute, we don't know who they are, but there seems there's a problem with them, you might want to go and investigate, right? Which is very different to the situation today where many of us have to kind of block whole IP ranges and impact, you know, many innocent users. And finally, this compelling need that we hear time after time, both in the academic and corporate space, is the ability in a simple way, without lots of pre-configuration, to be able to provide granular usage reporting at whatever level with whatever slicing that the customer would like. And then we think the solution we're working on addresses all four of these bullets. In terms of roadmap, we have already generated a couple of early outputs. There's a position paper on what identity federations can do to make all this work as best as it can. We're now in the process of talking about these outputs from the two work streams, the UX and the privacy and security. There's a little bit more work to do on the technical side with the pilots before we make the final recommendation on which option we're going for, which Meltem mentioned. And then we'll be drafting, putting out for consultation and comment the recommended practice via the NISO process. And as I mentioned earlier, starting to talk to potential operators of the central infrastructure so that we can also make a recommendation on who we think should pick that up, kind of plot what happens after the project phase. And then, obviously, once we have a solution and recommended practices, there's a huge implementation phase, and that's where we think NISO is really going to come to the fore and use their ability to engage with the academic community in education, outreach, and making this happen. So that's it from us. We're doing lots and talking about this, and Gabriel, who's also in the audience, is doing a fantastic job running our outreach team, and we've had a big program of talking at conferences. I think we have now over 600 folks on our mailing list, more to come. Yeah, that's it. Happy to take any questions. Thanks very much.
Questions?